Story 1. Factor 75 is today's sponsor, and let me tell you, October is always a hectic month for me. Between work and personal commitments, I barely have any free time, which means meal prepping and cooking often take a backseat. That is where Factor has been a lifesaver. Their fresh, never-frozen meals, approved by dietitians, get delivered right to your doorstep, making it easier than ever to stick to your nutrition goals. Factor eliminates the hassle of grocery shopping, prepping, and cooking, giving you back valuable time in your daily life. With over 35 meals to choose from each week, they offer options like keto, calorie smart, vegan, vegetarian, and more. Personally, I have been loving their high-protein selections, especially the Peruvian chicken with red pepper cauliflower grits and roasted broccoli, a perfect post-workout meal. If you want to try it out, head to factor75.com or click the link below and use code 50nightmare to get 50% off and free shipping on your first box, plus 20% off your next month of orders. That is code 50nightmare at factor75.com for a great deal. Now, before I dive into this story, let me give you some background so it all makes sense. Our cat, Cosmo, has always spent the night in the basement. Ever since I was a kid, my parents would pick him up from wherever he had settled and put him down there. They could not stand the cat hair he left on their bed, which, honestly, I understood. He was also an outdoor cat, so if he was not put in the basement at night, he would wake them up at 3 in the morning, yowling to be let outside. The basement is the largest room in our house, so I always figured he was fine with the arrangement. A little over 2 weeks ago, he started acting strangely. There is a small landing just behind the basement door where we usually place him before he makes his way downstairs. Normally, he would take a few seconds and then head down to sleep on whatever piece of furniture he chose. But one night, after I placed him on the landing and shut the door, something I had done countless times before, I heard him meowing behind the door while I was filling a glass of water in the kitchen. That was unusual. He always went downstairs right away. Curious, I went back to check, wondering if maybe his food bowl was empty. I opened the door, but instead of going down, he bolted past me into the living room as if something had startled him. When I checked his food bowl, it was full. Strange. I went after him, picked him up, and placed him back on the landing before shutting the door again. That was that, or so I thought. For the next 2 nights, the same thing happened. I would put him on the landing, close the door, and start getting ready for bed. Minutes later, I would hear him meowing over and over. When I checked, he was still at the top of the stairs, refusing to go down. I started worrying that maybe he was getting older and something was wrong with him, but I did not want to dwell on that thought. It bothered me, but eventually, I just ignored his meowing, knowing he would go down when he was ready. Then, the real trouble started. The next day, Cosmo would not come inside at all. Normally, when he wanted in, he would sit on the front steps or by the back door until someone noticed and let him in. That day, I saw him curled up on the doormat, completely still. When I opened the door, he did not move. Concerned, I went outside and petted him a little before heading back in. A few hours later, I checked again, and he had not budged. It was getting late, so I picked him up and carried him inside, though he was clearly unhappy about it. I decided to let him sleep in my room that night. He seemed much calmer that way. That arrangement did not last long. Within days, my dad started complaining that someone was leaving the basement door open, which annoyed him because it let the cold air escape. He was always reminding us that air conditioning was not free. I assumed my sister was the culprit. She had a habit of leaving doors and drawers open without thinking. I did not dwell on it too much because, honestly, I was just relieved that Cosmo seemed more at ease sleeping in my room. Then, one night, I woke up randomly. Still groggy, I glanced at my bedroom doorway and saw something that made my skin crawl. A silhouette stood there, perfectly still. I could make out the shape of a person against the dim glow of the lamp we always left on in the den. Thinking it was my sister, I called out to her. The figure moved away without saying a word. Too exhausted to question it, I drifted back to sleep. A couple of days later, we finally discovered what had been keeping Cosmo out of the basement: a flea infestation. The place was absolutely crawling with them. It was disgusting. It made sense that Cosmo would refuse to go down there, but what baffled us was how the fleas had appeared so suddenly. We had never had a problem before, and Cosmo always wore a flea collar. My dad accused my mom of not replacing it, though she swore she had. Determined to fix the problem, my dad went all out. We vacuumed, sprayed, scrubbed, and treated every inch of the basement with flea-killing solutions. My dad ordered everyone to stay out for a few days to make sure any remaining fleas would die off. That should have been the end of it, but then something even stranger happened. A few nights later, as I lay in bed, I noticed a flickering light under my door. It was as if someone was playing with the hallway switch, turning it on and off repeatedly. At first, I assumed it was just my dad getting up to use the bathroom, but it went on for too long. My heart pounded as I stared at the door, unable to bring myself to check. Eventually, it stopped. I forced myself to sleep, but I had never felt more uneasy in my life. Days later, my dad announced that the basement was clear. I had been eager to get back to playing video games down there, so after school, I headed straight for the basement. But the moment I got down there, I realized something was not right. Fleas were still crawling all over the place. That made no sense. After all the deep cleaning, they should have been gone. I decided to investigate. I went to the storage room in the back of the basement, where we kept old boxes and tools, thinking maybe a rodent had gotten in and died. As soon as I opened the door, I knew I was right. A thick, putrid stench hit me, making my eyes water. It was strongest near an unfinished crawl space that connected to the house's plumbing. I hesitated before stepping closer. It was pitch dark in there. Just as I turned to grab a flashlight, I heard it breathing, slow and steady, coming from inside the crawl space. My stomach dropped. The breathing grew louder, as if something or someone was moving toward me. Then, before I could react, a figure lunged from the shadows. A hand shot out, reaching for me. I bolted. I did not stop until I was upstairs, slamming the basement door shut behind me. I called the police immediately. When they arrived, they searched the house but found no one. All they discovered were some empty chip bags and food wrappers in the crawl space. Whoever had been living down there had escaped through the storm door. The officer suggested it was likely a homeless person looking for shelter, but that did not sit right with me. How long had they been there? How much had they seen? My parents were as horrified as I was. We have kept the basement door locked ever since. And Cosmo? He still refuses to go anywhere near it. Story 2. I do not remember every detail of this story since I was only around 7 years old when it happened, but over the years, my parents have filled in some of the gaps. There are still bits and pieces that stick out in my memory, so here it goes. I am an only child. Yeah, it kind of sucked growing up without siblings, but one of the perks was that my parents were very involved in my life. They went out of their way to make sure I was happy, and looking back, I really appreciate that. Every year around Halloween, my parents would turn our basement into a haunted house. It was nothing extravagant, just some old decorations, fake spiderwebs, strobe lights, and a whole lot of enthusiasm. The best part? It was for a good cause. To enter, people had to donate canned food, and my parents would take everything we collected to the local food bank. They even made flyers and handed them out at my school and a few other nearby elementary schools. Most of the visitors were families from my school, but there were always a few parents and kids we did not recognize. My parents actually welcomed that. The more strangers who showed up, the more food we collected, and the more successful the haunted house would be. We lived in a large brick house in a small Pennsylvania town. A lot of the houses in our neighborhood were entirely brick, built decades ago, and many had never been remodeled. It gave the whole area a slightly eerie atmosphere, especially at night. Our house, with its creaky floors and dimly lit hallways, already had a spooky vibe to it, which made it perfect for Halloween. Every year, my cousins, Brian, Jake, Chris, and Eric, would come over to help set up and manage the haunted house. Usually, they dressed in scary costumes and hid around the basement, waiting to jump out and scare my friends. That particular year, they decided to wear matching white masks, the kind with the blank, expressionless faces that make your skin crawl. It was a big hit, and by early evening, we had a great crowd going. Later, my parents told me that before the haunted house officially opened, a strange man showed up. He was alone, which was unusual because most visitors were families. He told my parents his wife was planning to bring their daughter later, but he wanted to drop off some canned food in advance. My parents thanked him, took the cans, and assumed that was the end of it. But as the night went on, something happened that still sends chills down my spine. I was running through the basement with my friends when one of them suddenly burst into tears. She told me that someone wearing one of those blank masks had grabbed her wrist and tried to pull her into a closet. My stomach dropped. I figured she might have been exaggerating, but the look on her face told me she was genuinely scared. I ran to find my parents and told them what she said. They took it seriously and immediately went to check on my cousins. Brian, Jake, and Chris were all in their usual spots, swearing they had done nothing like that. But then my parents noticed something. Eric was missing. Just then, Eric came running down the stairs, looking confused. He said he had gone upstairs for a bathroom break, and when he came back, his mask was gone. He had assumed one of the others had taken it as a joke. My parents instantly shut the haunted house down, made everyone leave, and called the police. Officers searched the house, but they found nothing. That night, I fell asleep easily enough, but I woke up to a strange sound, tapping at my bedroom window. It was soft but steady, like someone was lightly knocking. I was too scared to move, so I just pulled the covers up over my chin, hoping it would stop. Eventually, it did, and I drifted back to sleep. A few hours later, I woke up again, but this time, the sound was different. It was a scratching noise, more urgent than the tapping had been, like someone was clawing at the window frame. Fear took hold of me, but then something inside me snapped. I threw off my blanket, rushed to the window, and yanked open the curtains. My heart nearly stopped. Staring back at me, just inches from the glass, was a person wearing an identical blank mask. I screamed for my parents. They rushed into my room, and I pointed frantically at the window. But by the time they looked, the person was gone. The police came again, searched the yard, but found no footprints, no signs of forced entry, nothing. Months passed, and things started to feel normal again. My parents eventually eased up on their security measures, and the haunted house became just another memory. But then, one day after school, I walked into my bedroom and found something lying on my bed. It was an anonymous mask, just like the ones my cousins had worn that night. But what really terrified me was the writing scrawled across the forehead in black marker. My name. How did this person know my name? We called the police again, but there was little they could do besides filing another report. My parents took security to a whole new level. They installed cameras, replaced the locks, and even put sensors on the windows, including the upstairs ones. After that, nothing else happened. At least, not anything we could prove. But for months, I kept hearing noises outside my window. Tapping, scratching, little sounds that sent shivers down my spine. Maybe it was just my imagination, but I could never bring myself to sleep soundly in that room again. I have since grown up and moved away from that house, but even now, I still wonder, who was that person? And what would have happened if I had not screamed that night? Story 3. I recently got a job at a Mexican restaurant in a nearby town. The area was a little rough, but nothing I could not handle. I was also pretty desperate for money, so I did not have much of a choice. Plus, I figured working nights would not be so bad since it meant I would have most of the day to myself. The restaurant itself was decent enough, but the manager, Carlos, was shady. He always scheduled me for the worst hours, kept me late, and never seemed particularly concerned about following the rules. He had this way about him that made me feel like I could not trust him. But like I said, I needed the job. One night while closing up, I started hearing strange noises. I was mopping the tiled kitchen floor when I first noticed it, soft thudding and scraping sounds coming from below. It was faint at first, but I knew I was not imagining it. The thudding and scraping would alternate, and I was sure there were two distinct noises. I listened for a minute, and then it stopped completely. It startled me, but I brushed it off. Maybe an animal outside or just the pipe settling. But it kept happening. The noise would start up every night when the place got quiet, just as I was finishing my cleaning. After a few nights of this, I told Carlos about it. He shrugged it off immediately, told me it was nothing, and to stop worrying. He even said the restaurant did not have a basement. That is when I got suspicious. I knew he was lying because I had literally seen window wells around the back of the building. I wanted to call him out on it but held my tongue. Maybe the noises would stop on their own. Of course, they did not. The next day, I brought it up again, telling him there had to be a basement since there were windows below ground. That was when he gave me a strange look and insisted again that there was no basement. He said the previous owners had sealed it off years ago and that no one could get in or out. Then he told me, firmly, to stop poking around and just do my job. The way he said it, so dismissive and firm, gave me a bad feeling. But I needed the money, so I dropped it. The noises persisted. Every night, those low thuds and scraping sounds, like something, or someone, was moving down there. I could not shake the feeling that something was off, but I tried to ignore it. Then one night after closing up, curiosity got the better of me. I walked around to the back of the building, crouched down, and peered into one of the window wells. It was pitch black inside. Even with my phone flashlight, I could not see anything. Just as I was about to give up, a light flickered on inside the basement for a second, then snapped off before I could see anything clearly. My heart pounded. I rushed back to my car, too freaked out to go back inside. But I did not tell Carlos. Something told me it was better to keep quiet. The next time I closed, I could not resist checking again. This time, as I leaned in closer, I saw it. Pressed up against the glass was a face. A man, but not just any man. He looked completely deranged. His hair was wild, his face filthy like he had not bathed in weeks. His yellowed eyes were wide, staring right at me. Then he bashed his head against the window and grinned. A twisted, demented smile. I screamed and stumbled backward, barely keeping my balance. I sprinted to my car, fumbling with my keys, hands shaking. I managed to get inside and speed off before anything else could happen. The next day, I could not keep quiet anymore. I confronted Carlos and told him everything. To my surprise, he did not even try to deny it. Instead, he sighed and sat me down. Then he told me the truth. The man I had seen was his brother. He had been living in the basement. Carlos explained that his brother was mentally ill, dangerous even, and that he had been hiding him down there to keep him out of trouble. The basement had been sealed off years ago, but Carlos had found a way to let his brother live there, away from prying eyes. He begged me not to say anything, said he would appreciate it if I just forgot the whole thing ever happened. I did not know what to say. I wanted to quit right then and there, but I could not. I needed the money. So I convinced myself it would be fine as long as I stayed away from the basement. I kept my head down and avoided Carlos, but the whole thing left me on edge. A few weeks later, I regretted staying. It was late, and I had just finished closing up. As I walked to my car, I noticed something, or someone, lurking in the tree line near the parking lot. I could not make out details, but I knew it was a person, and deep down, I knew exactly who it was. My heart pounded, but I pretended not to notice. I kept walking, trying to stay calm. Then I heard footsteps behind me. I glanced over my shoulder, and there he was, Carlos' brother. He was moving strangely, hobbling, but he was coming straight for me. I scrambled for my keys, my hands shaking. I barely managed to unlock the car and throw myself inside just as he reached the door. He slammed his face against the window, smearing it with dirt and sweat. Then he started pounding on the glass. I screamed, but I could not think straight. All I knew was that I had to get out of there. I floored it, speeding out of the parking lot. I have no idea how I made it home that night without crashing. That was my last night at the restaurant. From the safety of my apartment, I called the police, but I never went back. I did not want to know what happened next. I did not want to know if they found the man or if Carlos got in trouble. I just could not be involved anymore. Even now, I cannot shake the feeling that Carlos might come looking for me one day. I do not know if he would go that far, but the thought lingers in the back of my mind. I never found out what happened to the restaurant, to Carlos, or to his brother. And honestly, I do not think I want to. Maybe one day I will take a drive past that place. But for now, I am staying as far away from it, and from them, as possible.